She loved to travel. She moved through the world with the kind of restless energy that people with money and unresolved pain often do. Always somewhere else. Always arriving, always buying things that could not fill whatever hollow place had opened up inside her. She liked electronics. She liked the chaotic sensory overload of border markets, the feeling of getting a deal, the brief illusion of control that comes from acquiring something new. She was 54 years old. She was a lawyer. She was studying psychology, perhaps because she already knew that the interior landscape of the human mind was the most dangerous and least charted territory of all. She was someone's wife, someone's daughter, someone who had survived a private grief so immense that she carried it like a stone pressed against her chest everywhere she went. She was, in every sense of the word, a real woman, complicated, brilliant, wounded, loved. And her name was Anic de Almeida Peixoto Herdy. Before we talk about how she died, I want you to hold that for a moment. Her name, her life, the version of herself that got on a plane and flew to Ciudad del Este in Paraguay to walk through a market full of cell phones and electronics with someone she thought she could trust. The version of herself who confided in a shopkeeper named Michel Mansour about the loss of a daughter, about grief that still cut clean through her years later. She was emotionally vulnerable, yes. She made choices that, in retrospect, put her in danger. But vulnerability is not an invitation. Pain is not a liability waiver. What happened to Anic Herdy was not the result of her flaws. It was the result of one man's decision to treat a human being as a resource to be drained and then discarded. My name is Harrison Cross, and this is the Blackout Tapes. Let's go back to the beginning. In 2021, the Herdy family sold their university. That sentence doesn't fully capture what it means. Benjamin Cordero Herdy was 78 years old, the son of José de Sousa Herdy, who had built something extraordinary in the city of Duque de Caxias, in the state of Rio de Janeiro. An entire educational empire that eventually became the Unigran Rio University. When the family negotiated the sale of that institution, they didn't just change their bank balance. They announced to anyone paying attention that they were now in possession of an almost inconceivable amount of liquid capital. In the world of predatory crime, that kind of announcement is a beacon. Anic was Benjamin's wife. She managed resources. She traveled internationally. She was active, visible, living a life that required her to move money and make decisions constantly. And somewhere in the orbit of that life, a man named Lourival Correa Netto Fadiga had positioned himself with extraordinary patience and precision. He went by two nicknames, Gordo, meaning fat, and Fatica, a corruption of his last name. He presented himself professionally as an IT technician. Over approximately 3 years, he had slowly, carefully, installed himself as a trusted figure inside the Herdy household. He serviced their computers. He maintained their security cameras. He was, in his own telling, the man who kept things running. In practice, he had achieved something far more valuable than technical access. He had achieved emotional access. He knew the house's rhythms. He knew the cameras, because he had installed them himself, which meant he controlled the surveillance apparatus entirely. He knew when Anic and Benjamin were home, when they left, when they fought, when they were alone. And he knew that Anic was unhappy in ways that made her susceptible to someone who paid attention. Whether the relationship between Lourival and Anic was romantic from the start or became so over time is something investigators pieced together slowly. What is clear is that at some point, it became sexual. He had become her lover, and a lover who has also installed your security system, who knows your financial habits, who drives your luxury car and uses your credit cards. That person is not simply a romantic partner. That person is a parasite who has mistaken his host for a meal. Witnesses would later say that Lourival's lifestyle, even before the crime, was wildly inconsistent with what a freelance IT technician could plausibly earn. In the space of approximately 6 months, he had moved and spent a sum of money that, by any conservative calculation, would have taken someone in his legitimate profession more than 6 years to accumulate. Nobody, it seems, asked the obvious question loudly enough. And there was the other lie, the one that would prove crucial later. To everyone he met through the Herdy family, to merchants in Paraguay, to anyone who might challenge his authority or presence in the household, Lourival presented himself as a federal police officer currently on active duty. It was a costume he wore so consistently and convincingly that it became, for most people in his circle, simply the truth. February 29th, 2024. There is something almost unbearably ironic about the date. A day that only exists once every 4 years. A calendrical anomaly. A day outside the ordinary count of time. On that morning, Anic left the house and drove to the Patio Petropolis shopping center, a mall in the mountain region of Rio de Janeiro. Cameras recorded her there. She parked her car, walked out toward Rua Teresa, a traditional commercial street in the city center, and somewhere along that route, she got into a vehicle being driven by Lourival. She got in voluntarily. That is one of the most painful details in the entire case. She knew him. She trusted him. She had no reason to believe that climbing into that car would be the last free movement of her life. What happened in the hours that followed is documented in the confessions of the killer, in the forensic reports of the Instituto Médico Legal, Brazil's state medical examiner's office, and in the coldly clinical language of the Instituto de Criminalística Carlos Eboli, the Rio de Janeiro State Forensic Science Institute. Lourival drove Anic to a motel. He brought her to a room where they would not be seen or heard. He blindfolded her, he handcuffed her, and then he struck her, a single, devastating blow to the throat, shattering her trachea. She fell. She began bleeding heavily from her mouth. The forensic evidence is unambiguous about the cause of death: mechanical asphyxia by strangulation. Lourival tied a nylon cable tie, the kind used to bundle electrical wires, tightly around her neck until her airways were completely occluded. She was 54 years old. She had been studying psychology. She had survived the loss of a child. She had traveled to Paraguay and confided in a stranger about her grief. And now she was dying on the floor of a motel room in Petropolis, killed by the man she had trusted with her life and her body. After she was dead, Lourival cleaned the floor with a sheet from the motel. He wrapped her body in it. He carried her out in the trunk of his car and drove her to his own home on Rua Alberto Sabin in the city of Teresópolis. It was, in its way, the most coldly logical part of everything. He already had the cover story in place. He was renovating his garage. There were excavations happening. There was concrete being mixed and poured. There was absolutely nothing suspicious about a man doing construction work at his own house. His neighbors saw a renovation. His visitors saw a renovation. Nobody saw what he buried under the fresh concrete. The body of Anic Herdy, wrapped in layers of plastic bubble wrap, still wearing the nylon cable tie around her neck, sealed into the earth beneath a thick structural floor. She would remain there for 7 months. That same night, the night of February 29th, Lourival sent text messages from Anic's phone to Benjamin Herdy. The messages demanded 4.6 million reais, roughly $1 million at the time, for the safe return of his wife. Benjamin, 78 years old, suddenly alone and terrified, did what anyone would do. He reached out to the person he most trusted to help him navigate the crisis. He called his friend. He called the man who had kept the house running for 3 years, who knew the systems, who, according to everyone including himself, was a federal police officer with the knowledge and authority to handle exactly this kind of situation. He called Lourival. And Lourival, standing in the wreckage of everything he had done, told the grieving husband exactly what he needed to hear. Do not call the police. Do not contact authorities. The kidnappers are watching. If law enforcement gets involved, Anic dies. Trust me. I will handle this. I will get her back." Benjamin trusted him. For weeks, Benjamin trusted him. He made approximately 40 separate financial transactions using PIC, Brazil's instant payment system similar to Zelle or Venmo, along with traditional wire transfers and electronic payments, sending the money to accounts in 4 different Brazilian states: Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, Santa Catarina, and Bahia. He converted funds into Bitcoin because the kidnappers demanded it. He did everything Lourival told him to do because Lourival was his friend, his fixer, his federal agent, the only person standing between him and the death of his wife. On March 14th, 2024, Anic's daughter finally broke. Against everything Lourival had told the family, against every warning, every carefully constructed argument about why involving the police would be fatal, she walked into the local police station and filed a formal report. A disappearance, a kidnapping, 2 weeks of silence and money and terror. What happened in the next 6 days is worth pausing on because it answers a question that any true crime listener will immediately ask. How did the police identify and arrest Lourival so quickly? The answer is that Lourival had already destroyed himself from the inside out. The financial trail was catastrophic for him. 40 transactions sent to accounts across 4 states, many of them traced back to people in his immediate circle, flagged almost instantly by investigators at the Financial Intelligence Unit, a federal body called the COAF, Conselho de Controle de Atividades Financeiras, Brazil's equivalent of FinCEN in the United States. The Bitcoin transfers, which he had believed would provide anonymity, were partially traced by the civil police's cybercrime unit. The cell phones Lourival had used to send the ransom messages were triangulated through cell tower data, placing him in suspicious proximity to the transmissions. And the man presenting himself as a federal officer with no verifiable badge number, who had inexplicably been installed as the family's crisis manager for an active kidnapping, immediately drew the kind of professional scrutiny that a real agent would never receive and that a fraudster absolutely cannot survive. On March 20th, 2024, 6 days after the report was filed, Lourival Correa Netto Fadiga was arrested. He did not go quietly into prison. He went strategically. The investigation that followed revealed a man who understood the legal system well enough to treat incarceration as a temporary inconvenience rather than an ending. From his cell at the José Frederico Marques public jail in the Benfica neighborhood of Rio de Janeiro, the state's primary intake facility for preventive detainees, Lourival maintained an active operational command structure using an illegally obtained cell phone. Text messages recovered from that phone documented his directions to his daughter, Maria Luisa Vieira Fadiga, with unsettling clarity. He told her which messages to delete. He told her to wipe the messaging history from every device in the family's possession. He monitored the status of the luxury pickup truck that had been purchased with extortion money. An IRAM 3500 Longhorn 6.7 diesel worth approximately 500,000 reais, registered in Maria Luisa's name because she had obligingly signed whatever her father asked her to sign. "Talk to the lawyer about the car," he wrote from prison. "Tell him to be careful because it could turn against me. You understand?" He directed his son, Henrique Vieira Fadiga, in the management of cash flows. He set up a system by which Maria Luisa's boyfriend would perform small currency exchanges, 2,000 reais at a time, weekly in Rio de Janeiro, and transfer the resulting funds to accounts accessible in Teresópolis. The instructions were precise and domestic. You stay at the store and he goes down. Once he exchanges it, he deposits into his account in Rio, withdraws in Teresópolis, and gives it to your mother. There were 4 people in this network beyond Lourival himself. Maria Luisa, his daughter, had registered the pickup truck in her name and had helped establish a cell phone repair shop, a retail front through which money from the extortion could be laundered through legitimate-looking sales and inventory. She had also, conveniently, obtained her motorcycle license in under 30 days immediately following the crime, right around the time Lourival bought a 30,000 race motorcycle registered in her name as well. Enrique, his son, had received physical deliveries of cash from doleros, underground money brokers who operate outside the banking system, functioning essentially as a black market currency exchange, bringing in approximately $150,000 in cash to the family home. And then there was Rebecca Azevedo dos Santos, Lourival's girlfriend, a woman who had entered the picture as his romantic partner and exited it as a co-conspirator. Investigators found, on her phone, a text message that stopped them cold. In it, she referred to the ashes already traveling through Rio, a chilling, oblique confirmation that she knew Anic was dead. Not missing, not kidnapped, dead. Rebecca had also traveled to Foz do Iguaçu, the Brazilian city on the border with Paraguay, to manage the receipt and resale of 950 cell phones ordered from a supplier in Ciudad del Este. The same border market Anic had once visited, the same city where a shopkeeper remembered her buying electronics and crying about her daughter. The phones were the inventory for the retail store that Lourival's children had established as a money laundering vehicle, a legitimate-looking business through which stolen money could be fed into the formal economy. And on the day of her arrest, captured in national television coverage, Rebecca was wearing a coat. It belonged to Anic. Women who had worked for the Herdy family watched the news and felt their stomachs drop. They recognized it immediately. 7 months after Anic was murdered, on September 25, 2024, police broke through the concrete floor of Lourival's garage in Teresópolis. The body was there. It was exactly where he had said it would be once the negotiation for a plea agreement, a delação premiada, Brazil's formal cooperation deal that allows defendants to exchange information for reduced sentences, began to crack open his silence. Forensic technicians found human remains in an advanced state of decomposition, wrapped in layers of plastic bubble wrap. The cable tie was still around her neck. Identification required DNA analysis compared against samples from family members and odontological examination of dental records. The confirmation came back unambiguous. It was Anic de Almeida Peixoto Herdy, 54 years old, lawyer, psychology student, traveler, grieving mother, complicated woman, someone's wife. Someone who, in a moment of terrible judgment, trusted the wrong person with her loneliness. She had been in the ground for 7 months while her husband wired away his life savings to the man who had killed her. 1 week after the body was found, Lourival's defense team called a press conference. This moment in the case is worth examining slowly, because it represents something almost architectural in its cynicism, a construction built not to reveal truth, but to bury it under a landslide of plausible-sounding accusation. Lourival had written a letter from prison. In it, he confirmed that yes, he had killed Anic. Yes, he had buried her body in his garage under concrete. Yes, he had lied for months and directed his family in criminal operations. But, and here was the detonation, he claimed he had done all of it on the orders of Benjamin Herdy. According to the letter, Benjamin had hired him to kill his wife. The extortion had never been real. The 4.6 million reais was not a ransom. It was payment. The entire kidnapping theater had been staged by the two men together to disguise a contract killing as a third-party crime. Benjamin, Lourival claimed, had wanted Anic dead because of disputes over the family fortune derived from the Unigran Rio sale. The defense pointed to cell tower data showing Lourival and Benjamin in proximity during the ransom negotiations. They cited security footage from the Barra shopping mall complex in Rio de Janeiro, showing the two men together at a bank, withdrawing cash, appearing calm, surely not the behavior of a man under duress, they argued. The strategy was ambitious in the way that a fire set to a forest is ambitious. It didn't need to prove anything. It only needed to create enough smoke that the machinery of the investigation would have to stop and pivot. consuming months of forensic resources to disprove something that had never been true. The delegada leading the investigation. In Brazil's legal system, a delegada is the senior detective who presides over a criminal inquiry, a role equivalent to a lead investigative superintendent. Dr. Cristiana Honorato Miguel ran the accusation through every available filter. Benjamin's phone was forensically extracted using the most advanced digital tools available. His financial records, phone records, and digital communications were examined in exhaustive detail. He handed over his devices voluntarily and immediately. Nothing, no message, no transfer, no contact, supported the idea that he had arranged to have his wife killed. The meeting at Barra Shopping, seen in context, told an entirely different story. It was Lourival shepherding a terrified elderly man to a bank to extract cash under the pretense of paying for his wife's life. It was extortion. It had always been extortion. Benjamin's lawyer called it what it was, an act of desperation and cruelty, a second attempt to victimize a man who had already been destroyed by the first. In November of 2024, the formal charges were expanded significantly. The Ministério Público, Brazil's independent prosecutorial office, equivalent to the district attorney's office in the United States, filed an amended indictment naming Lourival Correa Netto Fadiga, Rebecca Azevedo dos Santos, Henrique Vieira Fadiga, and Maria Luisa Vieira Fadiga as defendants in a case of triply aggravated homicide. The additional charges included concealment of a corpse, money laundering, and systematic obstruction of justice. The following month, in October of 2024, let me step back briefly in the timeline here. The two children had briefly tasted freedom. Their defense, led by an attorney independent from Lourival's representation, argued that they had acted under their father's authority, deceived about the nature of what they were participating in. A court agreed provisionally, revoking their preventive detention. Maria Luisa had signed documents her father told her to sign, with text messages showing him ordering her to sign this document for me, while being evasive about its contents. Henrique had answered the door when the doleiros arrived with cash-stuffed envelopes, his lawyer arguing he had assumed it was simply one of his father's normal financial dealings. In March of 2025, the Ministério Público issued its formal conclusion regarding Benjamin Herdy. He had no involvement in the death of his wife. The inquiry against him was archived, formally closed without charges. He was cleared completely. The accusation Lourival had constructed from his prison cell, the letter designed to destroy a grieving widower, had been dismantled piece by piece and thrown out. On June 23, 2025, a judge in the first criminal court, the Vara Criminal, of the city of Petrópolis issued new preventive arrest warrants for all three co-defendants, Henrique Vieira Fadiga, Maria Luisa Vieira Fadiga, and Rebecca Azevedo dos Santos. The warrants cited systematic destruction of digital evidence, serious risk to public order, and an obvious, credible danger of flight in the face of sentences expected to be severe for anyone convicted of aggravated murder. The danger was real. When officers moved to execute the warrants, none of the three were found. All three had disappeared. Within days, the Disc Denuncia, Brazil's public anonymous tip line similar to Crime Stoppers in the United States, reachable at 197, was broadcasting appeals, asking anyone with information about the whereabouts of the three fugitives to come forward. As of this recording, in the middle of 2026, they remain at large. Lourival Correa Netto Fadiga is in custody, awaiting trial before a jury. The case is approaching the final phase of the accusatory proceedings in the criminal court of Petrópolis, moving steadily toward a sentença de pronúncia, a formal judicial declaration that there is sufficient evidence to send the case to trial, which will deliver him before the Tribunal do Júri, Brazil's jury court. where 7 ordinary citizens will hear the evidence and decide his fate. Given the forensic weight of the case against him, that decision seems foregone. But the trial itself has not yet happened. The verdict has not yet been delivered. The system is moving. It is moving slowly, as systems do, but it is moving. I want to come back to Anic for a moment. In the official documents, in the forensic reports, in the criminal indictments, she is described primarily through the lens of her victimhood and her wealth. She is the high-value target. She is the woman whose family sold a university. She is the body found under the concrete. She is the DNA match to the remains in the garage. But she was also the woman who flew to Paraguay and walked through an electronics market and talked to a shopkeeper about her daughter. She was the woman who cried in a shop in Ciudad del Este. She was the woman who, somewhere in the architecture of her grief, made herself available to someone who recognized her pain as leverage. She was not naive. She was a lawyer. She was an educated, accomplished, financially sophisticated woman who was also, simultaneously, someone who needed to be seen and comforted and accompanied, and who was failed catastrophically by the person she chose to trust with that need. There is nothing unusual about that. There is nothing shameful about it. People who have survived great loss often reach for closeness in ways that make them vulnerable. It does not make them responsible for the violence committed against them. It makes them human. Anic was 54. She had built a life. She had survived things we can only partially reconstruct from the fragments of testimony left behind by strangers in foreign markets. She had a husband who, by every measure, loved her enough to pay millions in good faith to get her back, and who was then accused by her killer of having ordered her death. A secondary cruelty so specific and deliberate that it almost defies comprehension. She deserved to grow old. She deserved the degree in psychology she was pursuing, the credential that might have told her something she already suspected, that the people closest to us carry within them the entire range of human potential, including the capacity to destroy us completely. She was Anic de Almeida Peixoto Herdy. She was a real person. And what was done to her? The violence, the burial, the years of performance and deception layered on top of her death, was a crime not just against her body, but against her dignity, her memory, and the family she left behind. This case is not over. The 3 fugitives are somewhere. The jury trial for Lourival has not yet taken place. The legal maneuvers that are the inevitable texture of complex criminal cases will continue to unfold over months and possibly years. What we have, as of the middle of 2026, is a case in which the truth has been established beyond any credible doubt. The forensics, the DNA, the cable tie, the buried body, the phone messages, the money trail, the confession, and a justice system working imperfectly and at enormous cost to the surviving family toward accountability. It is worth saying that clearly. The system worked in the sense that the truth was found. The body was recovered. The formal closure of the inquiry against Benjamin Herdy represents the system correcting itself after being weaponized by a murderer against an innocent man. That is not nothing. It matters. But it is also worth sitting with what it cost. Benjamin Herdy paid 4.6 million reais to the man who had already killed his wife. He spent weeks in anguish, then months under false suspicion, then years in a legal process that will not end until everyone involved has stood before a judge. The family has not been whole since February 29th, 2024. The truth was found, but Anic is still in the ground, and the man who put her there is still waiting for his jury. Her name was Anic. Remember her name.